Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, FRIEDMAN, LLP, GEMINI Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, MASSEY KNAKAL Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, the Moinian Group, NEWMARK Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Witkoff Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. You know, the office market in New York has been resuscitated, as one would say. A year ago, the market was basically dead. But today, you know, tenants are signing leases, deals are being made, things are happening. So what I've done today is to assemble a couple of owners, representatives, and probably the preeminent leasing brokers in New York. My guests they include Gus Fields, Executive Vice President at Cushman & Wakefield, Steve Durrells, Executive Vice President, Director of Leasing for SL Green, Andrew Levin, Senior Vice President, Leasing, Boston Properties, and last but not least, a returnee, David Falk, President of the Tri-State Region of NEWMARK Knight Frank, and as I called him before, my executive producer for helping me bring the group together. So, David, you've been around the business. I'd say all of you have been around the business. How do you look at the market now in the fall of 2009 as compared to the fall or the winter of 2008?
It's completely different. It's a year ago, everyone had their head in the sand. No one wanted to think about tomorrow. Today, it's an opportunistic market. The deals that are being done, tenants are looking out in the market and seeing landlords or banks or subleases where the rents are fair, the work might be more than they were getting a year ago. It's a good time to do business. So I think it's much more positive and forward-thinking.
What about the velocity, Gus?
It's almost from 0 to 60 in 500 feet. Last year at this time, the only deals that were being done for the most part were 1, 2, perhaps 3-year leases with an option to cancel after 2. As David said, now you've got companies that they have enough confidence in the future, and they also believe that now is historically a good time to lock in for the long term. So it is a very healthy market right now, as opposed to a very stagnant market a year ago.
Steve, SL Green in New York City has 27 million square feet. Boston Properties, Andrew, has 9 million square feet. How has the velocity in your buildings with such a large volume, being the largest landlord in New York, how do you see it now?
Well, I think the velocity is, you can measure it on the size of deals as much as the number of deals. The dynamic of our portfolio is that we've got a wide range of spaces, and the portfolio is made up of buildings that have small tenants, big tenants, and 1,000 tenants in total. So even in the worst of times, we're still busy. But today versus the beginning of the year, we're seeing much larger tenants make decisions, and we're seeing those tenants make much longer term commitments than what we saw at
So
the
what are
beginning
we
of the year.
seeing today in commitments, Andrew? I mean, Boston owns 9 million square feet, in my opinion, probably the best properties in New York City. What are we seeing tenants, as Gus was saying prior to, earlier, are we seeing them sign a 3-year lease? Are they signing a 5-year lease? Or as your press release said, a 9.2-year lease? What are we seeing in New York?
It really depends on the space, but for the most part, if the tenants are smart, they're going long. So it's 10 years, 15 years in some cases. But in other cases, there are tenants who, smaller tenants at more boutique buildings who are doing 5-year deals, who are doing 3-year deals. It really depends on where they are in their business cycle and, what sort of term meets their requirement.
People, there was this term, if you read in the articles or something, extend and blend. Would you explain what that means, Steve? Or
It's a pretty simple concept. It means that we take a tenant who may have 2 or 3 or 4 years of remaining lease term, and we structure a deal that extends the term beyond that to probably a 10-year new term from today, and we average the in-place rent together with a market rent for the extension period, so that hopefully that blended average is above what the in-place rent is, or if need be, sometimes it's a little less. But it's simply an averaging of the rent for the additional term.
Now, what about tenants? Because the economy has been in turmoil. What about tenants who have come to you or to any of you and said, I really can't afford the rent that I've been paying. I signed a lease at $85 a square foot or $90 a square foot, and hey, look, I'm a law firm. My business is down. I used to depend on a lot of real estate transactions. What do you do? I mean, have landlords like SL Green and Boston Properties and other landlords made deals with tenants?
Well, you really should ask them.
I'm asking both sides.
I would say that when it first started, you started hearing this at the end of last year, and I had never heard this before, really, in the overall office market. We heard very little of it, though. We heard people talking about it, but at the end of the day, I can't cite many examples have I heard of landlords giving anything back.
I've heard virtually none. I heard one instance, and it was more of a ploy than anything else. I think you did see a lot of companies, law firms, and others put space on the market, sublease it sometimes for a short-term period so that they could reduce their costs, but also provide future space to grow into. But I share that with you. I haven't really heard of any of that.
What about the landlords?
Well, it's no surprise that when you are in a recession and there's a difficult economic environment, businesses struggle more frequently than they would otherwise. By comparison, I've been around long enough to be through a couple of these cycles. So by comparison to prior recessions, as bad as the economy is today, I think we were very surprised by the number of tenants that that had legitimate, a case to make where we felt compelled to offer some sort of relief. And typically, I would say in the handful of cases where it was a legitimate request, it turned into probably a blend and extend, averaging rent down, maybe replacing them, putting them into a different piece of space that's a lower price point piece of space. But the number of deals where we actually gave somebody real meaningful relief, I don't think it filled one hand.
Yeah, we've not seen any of that really. We've certainly had our shares of defaults and bankruptcies, and we've dealt with those appropriately. And a lot of the leasing we've done over the past quarter has been to replace Lehman Brothers space at 399 Park Avenue. We've been very happy with that, the level of velocity over the past 3 to 6 months.
I remember in the early 90s downtown, that kind of stuff was happening 4 or 5 years into the recession. Everything happened so quickly in this one that, like you said,
I think that's the big point. This, there was no activity, market was, but here it's adjusted, and people have made the decision, perhaps starting in the summer of 2009, to sign leases, to look for property, to make that determination. Would you agree?
Yeah, you're also seeing today that the brokers who are representing the tenants are very aware on how long space can sit in the market. So what they're doing is space that tenants who have leases up in 2012, brokers are coming to the market, they're going out in the market, they're shopping the deal, and they're going back to their landlord. They know if they move out, the cost to replace that tenant is so significant that they're able to cut a deal much earlier today. The landlord benefits because they're avoiding on the uncertainty. The tenant benefits by, in a tenant's market, cutting a long-term deal, maybe blending it, or maybe just extending it.
Now, on the leases that you've been negotiating, I mean, are we seeing a 5-year lease? I mean, I heard Andrew talking about certain 10 and 15-year leases in certain occasions. What are we seeing? Is it a 5-year? Is it a 10-year?
We're seeing the bigger deals, certainly minimum 10 years. We are seeing boutique deals anywhere that could be as small as 3 years to 5 years. Obviously, smaller deals could be less term.
And what type of, from peak to trough, rents in buildings, on Park Avenue or the Plaza District, we're going for $140, $150 a square foot. Where are the highest rents today in the market?
You still got buildings like 375 Park, 390 Park, the
General
Motors
building.
9 West
Okay,
57th.
the General Motors building, which you happen to own, I didn't want to bring up the question, but you brought it up yourself. Rents were $175 a foot.
Rents were more than that.
They were $200
Sure.
a foot. So what are rents today?
Rents are, we're talking about rents in the 90s at the base of that building.
That's what I'm saying. So they were as high as $200 a foot. They're down to $90 a foot.
But $200 a square
Well,
foot was at the top of the building.
The top of the
so
building, yes.
We'd certainly be, well into the double digits at the top of the building.
So what does somebody pay to buy, to be in a, and we were talking prior to the show, if they wanted to get into a sublease or a short-term situation, a 277?
There's your man.
Well, 277 is not a short term, that's a long term.
That's 277 Park?
Correct.
How long of a term?
It goes through January of 2021.
It's a long-term lease.
And there is fully improved, furnished investment banking office space available, different floor sizes, 23,000 square feet to 47,000 square feet to 60,000 square feet.
So for the small, how much can someone pay?
Well, we've got some leases out that we're negotiating right now, but generally our asking rents are in $60 a square foot, plus or minus, depending upon the floor. And I think that's a great example of why it's a healthy market.
Now this is furniture. This is a furnished
fully
space?
furnished, move-in condition, and a fairly generous tenant improvement allowance available on top of that.
That deal is cited very often in the market because here you can be on Park Avenue with credit behind you, long-term lease. And so the only thing you really can't get is maybe expansion rights. But when landlords say, well, it's a sublease, but it's pretty much everything but expansion.
2021 is not a sublease. I mean,
it is, but people have chosen to come to 399 Park versus do that sublease because of all the other things that a direct lease represents.
I mean, some have, some haven't, but you're right.
So let's leave the best locations. Let's leave the Plaza and the Park. What's happening? I mean, you have a lot of buildings in Grand Central, which is still a great location. I mean, you have the Gray Bar building. You temporarily have 485, and you're still going to have 485 Lexington Avenue. You have the other buildings. How much are rents in the Grand Central area today?
I think across the board, they're probably off 30% from their high.
So could a tenant get a nice space for $45 a square foot in that area?
Yeah, I think, if you're in that $45 to $50 price point, there's a wide selection. And there's a wide selection of a lot of different sizes. The difference becomes, and I think you're hearing it a little bit from everybody, it becomes very specific to what kind of space are you looking for, and is it highly improved, or is it raw space that needs to be rebuilt? And that space, which is highly improved, has a lot of activity on it.
Yeah.
And it's leading landlords and sub-landlords in some cases to needing to pre-build their space or even to build to suit for
you
tenants.
bring up an interesting point about pre-building, and you can give the situation in the residential market. A number of years ago, condominiums were sold on floor plans, and people would just sign, they'd go to the contract. Today, you can't sell a condominium. It's not the model apartment. They want to see the building. they want to see the building up. They want to know that they can move in. And it sounds similar the way in the office market. They want to see that built unit where they can have the furniture, or they can have a pre-built, or they can have something over there. They don't want to imagine.
Well, you know, Gus and Dave will tell you when they take people out for a space tour, the first thing everybody says, I want built space with furniture. And they see all the built space with furniture, and then they say, well, it works, it doesn't work, and then they go to the next level. And until they find exactly what they're looking for, they refine their search. It happens every time. And the better built space, like 399 Park Avenue, the Lehman Brothers space, that goes first. And people pay a little bit of a premium, and they do it much quicker because there are more candidates and takers for that space.
Right.
And I think as we start to cycle through the market and start to cycle through some of that space, the second tier spaces will start to get more attention because the first tier spaces are gone.
Right.
And that will start to work its way through and get to raw space.
If you will, the one thing that still is similar between now and a year ago is I think that tenants are very hesitant to go to a situation where they're going to have, you know, over $100 a square foot capital outlay to build new space.
We actually recently looked at, there was 44 deals done in the last 12 months, over 40,000 feet. And we said, how many of those deals were relocations to space that had to be built? There was 8 of them. And of those 8, most of those were either funded by an abundance of a bank putting money into a deal. So the days where the landlord gave $40 in cash and the tenant paid $130 out of their own pocket,
right,
that has been absent right now.
Right.
But I think the first thing that might change in the market is concessions. Concessions, you know, I think the first thing you'll start to see when things get healthy is back to normalcy.
You won't see the 6 months to 9 months of free rent, is what you're saying.
Well,
I mean, for my audience to understand what a concession.
It's the cash. It's the
cash
components.
The TI.
That's what will tighten up.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if I'm a tenant and I'm looking for space, where is the, as one would say, the proverbial best bargain? Where can a tenant get the best? I mean, we know they can get a great deal on the Park Avenue in your buildings. But I'm talking about somebody wants space. I really don't care about my location. I need some office space in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. What's the best deal today, Gus?
I'd suggest to you there are opportunities in every submarket in Manhattan. I mean, whether it's Midtown South, Park Avenue for sure, Midtown South, there are some almost full building subleases where tenants have built out the space. It's fully furnished and available for long-term sublease. Certainly downtown, building you just acquired. So there are pockets of opportunities, I think, in every market.
So what do you believe is the lowest rent that someone who wants to come, you know, here's my reason for this question. A number of years ago, I think I had Robert Ivanhoe, the chairman of the real estate department at Greenberg Traurig, and they were 200 Park Avenue, and they wanted additional space, and what they did was they moved to Westchester. They took some place in White Plains. Last year, a tenant in your building, Weil Gotshal, took space in Metrotech because to save money for the back office and certain things. Where do you go today for the back office or the lowest rent for that situation?
Certainly Brooklyn. I think the New Jersey waterfront, there was a big deal just done on the New Jersey
Depository Trust.
Yep. So I think the outlying markets, those two certainly for sure.
But you'll also see people not have to go there because they can actually, those that were planning on actually bifurcating their operation might say, I can stay in Manhattan, I don't have to go through all that.
Yeah.
You know, if a tenant was planning to go to Metrotech and pay $35 a square foot, they can now go in Manhattan and pay the $35 in Lower Manhattan or some other markets in the submarket.
Right.
So, but now you're the only landlord here who has a building in Brooklyn over here. Mm-hmm. You have a classic building in the Court Street area, which is a special, different market over there. What's happening in Brooklyn in that market?
You know, that particular building is a small space specialty building. It caters to the legal profession because of its location next to the courts. And we've actually just finished a redevelopment of the property, and after a lot of years of prior ownership's election not to spend any money on the building, we've come in and really upgraded everything about the property. And we're finding tenants. We're finding tenants on all parts of the building, where it's at the bottom or the top of the building, and deals are being done in that kind of $30, $32, $29 price
Yeah,
point.
now I have a question with regard to that. You know, we're talking about the rents. How many tenants, when they look at Brooklyn or Queens, because there was the MetLife space in Long Island City, how many of these tenants look at the REAP benefits, the relocation allowances? Because that could amount to
huge.
$10 to $12 a square foot, effectively, in there. How do you see that?
I mean, I think any tenant that has anyone advising them clearly is looking at the benefits of $3,000 per employee.
Yeah.
Right. So you know, it's a major number. So I think it absolutely is a factor.
Seems to be a driver, though, for the bigger tenants. You know, those tenants who are going from Manhattan to Brooklyn as for price relief. I don't see it as much for the small space guy, for the law firm with 10 employees. It doesn't
really amount to anything for them.
But when a big institution needs to move a couple of 100,000 square feet, then all of a sudden that becomes a very important component of the calculus.
You know, Gus, you spent 14 years, you were saying to me, in Lower Manhattan. Right now, we have, you know, AIG's moving out of their space. We have Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch consolidating their space. We have Goldman moving 2.3 million from their space. We're going to have a lot of space in Lower Manhattan.
Absolutely.
So what do you see happening in Lower Manhattan?
Well, I think the downtown market's going to lag the midtown market by probably several years. I think historically what's happened in that scenario is that you have companies from midtown looking downtown because the value spread, if you will, increases. You've also got new construction downtown with the you know, the World Trade Center buildings going up. So good news is you've got a good ownerships down there, Brookfield Properties, Silverstein, Port Authority, and you know, I think that the ownerships there are going to be very realistic about what they have to do to make deals. You've still got some very good tenant bases down there, and I don't think the city is going to allow downtown to...
you know, Lower Manhattan was always known as the low-cost alternative.
Yeah.
And that low-cost alternative, but, you know, if I'm going to be able to pay 30 in, you know, Park Avenue South, why do I want to run down to Lower Manhattan?
I think we size, though. The larger, the Flatiron District, Midtown South, the floor plates are small. If someone needs larger footprints, they're going to have to expand their search. And that's why areas in other markets, that's why West Chelsea, that's why Hudson Square, those were old printing buildings. People went there because they couldn't get that on Park Avenue South and 21st Street.
You know, you bring up the point on Hudson Square. Every week I go down to 1010 Winds, which relocated from 888 7th Avenue down to Hudson Square. It's a different type of life, you know, but it's, you know, they did very well in 2006, 2007 when prices were at a high level. How is Hudson Square doing today?
Hudson Square, first of all, when you go down there, it is great. The buildings, the work that's been done to a lot of the portfolios, the buildings are as nice of a Midtown South property as you'll see. The issue is that it's difficult to get to compared to Flatiron, and so I think when you can rent space in similar rental rates in Midtown South, that's the challenge. They were forced out in 2007, and they looked down there. Now it's a little more, it's a little softer, and there's more opportunities in Midtown South.
Now I ask a controversial question, which I will not ask these gentlemen. We have 3 basically new office properties in Manhattan. How do you see them renting, and what do you see them at? We have 510 Madison, we have 545 Madison, and we have 11 Times Square.
The first 2, someone has to jump in first. They're small tenant buildings, and you know, I don't recall in our careers where a building, the first tenant in was 10,000 feet. It's rare. So, you know, they were hoping to bring in at 510 a 40,000, 50,000 for tenant and get it going. 11 Times Square, it's going to happen. It needs a big tenant to come in.
Yeah.
I believe they will. I think 11 Times Square will get the tenant.
They will.
I believe that, you know, the staying power of SJP and Prudential are there. It is a great location. You know, it's convenient to everything, and it'll work out. The comment that was made in a program where I moderated today was the the landlord or the bank who basically owns, a property like 510 or like 545 really can't afford to take a low rent because of the basis that you have on the property. So even though you may want to, it's a difficulty. And that relates to another thing. What happens, I have the strongest landlords over here. The only one who's missing is Vornado of the Class A office REITs in New York on Brookfield. What happens when somebody is looking at a building with an undercapitalized landlord?
You can't make a deal. There are still challenges in this market, and that's one of them. I'd say the security deposit for ownerships, trying to agree upon a security deposit for any business, because it used to be that Lehman Brothers didn't need a security deposit. We saw what happened there. And then on the other side, tenants have to do their due diligence to make sure that the financial condition of the building is strong. And unfortunately, there are several properties out there where that's not the case.
It becomes a competitive advantage, quite frankly.
For you guys, I think it's a great advantage. For other people who bought buildings in 2006, 2007, who are undercapitalized. I did a panel a couple of weeks ago, and somebody who's a really good landlord, he said, I can't afford this. I can't get my bank to give me the money to do the improvements because I need money for the improvements, and I have a securitized mortgage, and I'm in really a troubled situation.
Tenants seem to be more sensitive to it in this recession than maybe they have in prior recessions. I think they've read headlines, they've read the horror stories in prior recessions, and their brokers are better educated, and there's better information, and it seems it's a big concern that weighs on their minds.
So I wish I had more time, but a half an hour is finished, and I really think that for my audience, for the tenants who are looking for space, they're going to gain a lot of perspective on what's happening. I'd like to thank Gus Field, Steve Durrells, Andrew Levin, and my executive producer, David Falk, for being here. See you next week.
Thank you.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Inc., New York's Window Company, New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional funding is provided by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, FRIEDMAN, LLP, GEMINI Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey KNAKAL Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Muss Development, LLC, the Moinian Group, NEWMARK Knight Frank, Orphanides and Associates, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund, the Wickoff Group.